Now, 1 foot off center.
And now it's on, gonna blow your mind.
Rick Maddison here, and we have a very hot topic today on housing, and I want to introduce our panel here. We have Scott Lanigan, lead pastor at Trinity Baptist.
So well done.
Baptist? Sorry.
We just go Trinity. Yeah, it's
okay.
all good.
One of the most entertaining, God-fearing men you'll ever meet. Jeff Cox, CEO of Simply Benefits, as well as partner at Sierra Insurance. Straight-talking guy. He will not hold back. It'll be great. Welcome, Jeff. And then we have Mattiussi, former CEO of Kelowna, and a man who knows a thing or two about a thing or two, which is municipal government, everything else. So happy to have you gentlemen here to share on a topic I think that's, again, as I move through the community, everyone has an opinion, everyone has an idea or thought of how they can bring housing supply up and maybe more affordable. But before I taint the views, I want to start with you, Ron. Let's face it, Kelowna is always going to be a desirable, high-growth city. Always has been, always will be. When I say the words housing crisis, if we are in fact still in a housing crisis, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, Kelowna's a little different than a lot of cities, right? I mean, in many cities were created, they have an industry or something, and the housing market will rise and fall based on that industry. If it's a paper mill and the paper mill's closing, then housing prices drop. Kelowna's housing, is kind of on the jet stream. Like we pull in people from everywhere, and so they're really, when Western Star closed, it was really sad, but it didn't even impact our housing, right? Mm-hmm. So we hit a different. We're tapped into a different source there. So Kelowna will always have a housing problem in that, like London, England does, like New York City does, like a lot of places that are desirable to live have housing problems. So, you have to watch the way in which you try to deal with that problem. And, I think they've done a good job, although it's a bit self-serving apparently for me to say it. But I think certainly over the years, the staff have done a good job recognizing, and council, staff recommendations, but the council with the fortitude to do it, to create a cross-section of housing. I mean, we always understood that, the more choice people have, from secondary suites to micro suites to apartments to condos to duplex to houses, the more choice people may fit something that fits their budget and be able to move up. So I think one of the things they did really well over the last number of years is provide that choice. There's a lot of housing choice. Price, well, that's the market. The market determines the price of concrete and wood, steel, people. And but I think they've done a good job of providing a really good cross-section of housing types for people.
Well, you heard it here first. Mattiussi's in favor of the people that work at the city. Yes. Jeff Cox, when I say housing crisis, what does that mean to you? I mean, we all have cover different parts of the community. What does that mean to you?
I think the basic function is, do you have enough supply for the demand? That's a housing crisis. If you don't have enough supply for the demand, then you have a housing crisis. My question is the dream of what existed when I was growing up gone? So I think of a prominent or neighborhood most people know in Kelowna, like Hall Road. If you go back to Hall Road in the 80s, you had mill workers, doctors, small business owners interacting in the same community, able to live in the same community. That doesn't exist today. Is that a housing crisis? Like we have actually created the divisiveness of where people live. In that era, you could have this mix, and it wasn't forced. Today we build low income housing in. I don't want to be very careful, but we may look at a low income housing build in a high end neighborhood. More so, probably in Vancouver, you hear that than you do here. But that's forced to me, and I think it can coexist without government having to say, hey, we need to do this. The short answer is, if you don't have enough supply for your demand, you're in a housing crisis.
And I think right now we're actually seeing an increase in supply, which actually might push builders to not build. That's the balancing that happens when you have too much vacancy rate, I mean, then the building somewhat stops, slows, that kind of thing. So over to you, Scott. What do you think? Housing crisis.
Well, I would suggest that it's similar to what both Ron and Jeff just mentioned. Ron talking about this being a desired place to live. So there always is, because of that desirability, I think those selling houses or building houses are able to kind of prefer their pricing because of that desire, which then I think the crisis trickles down until young professionals like my kids who are in their 20s, and they're looking at trying to even think of a day where they could get into a house. And so now it becomes the affordability issue, and I think that's a crisis unto itself in the housing market, because now you want to have young blood, you want to have young minds, you want to have those individuals involved in the business sector, in all sorts, in travel sector, tourism, except they go, I can't live here. So you get these young professionals that are, I would love to own a house, I'm not sure I'm able to do so. So now they have to move out. And it seems the only way you have that is if you have a generational home here, that family has been here for a while, and they, 20 years ago, they were able to buy a home at which is way cheaper than it is today. And so now they're stuck. And so there's a crisis because they're looking at, how do I even get in? So my daughter rents, and they're in a 2-bedroom unit, which isn't large, and they're paying $2,200. But the problem isn't necessarily just that level. It's also that now there's parking fees and all the other fees. And so now it's not just what the rental is. And I think it goes hand in hand with that. It's a crisis of a different sort, that we're not able to then attract and keep younger families and younger individuals to stay in this community and invest in this community for the long term. Rather, they're like, I'm not sure there's accessibility. And that's when the crisis, when people are staying around, it's desirable, and you have retirees coming in here and buying those spaces as well. Now then you don't have a whole lot of options for these guys to move into. So I think of it from that perspective, and I don't see that improving a whole lot, even with the vacancy rates, because when the vacancy rate was up, actually the prices went up as well. And so I don't think the hope would be, if there's more vacancy, then the prices would reduce. And
you saw vacancy rate went up and the prices went up?
Yeah, that's what the median price for single and double went up actually as well.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. Okay. Further to this about, I guess, the next generation owning in Kelowna, one of the few pieces of the platform that I've heard about from the NDP was they talked about this program, which was if you're a first-time home buyer, they would give you the money for the down payment as a loan. They get equity in the house, and they get on the title. So Jeff has already shaken his head. I heard about this, and again, I've daughter 16, son who's 20, both trying to figure out, how do I live in this great place, which is called Kelowna, or in the Okanagan Valley for that matter. And I just don't know what's possible for them. So Jeff, let's go to you. What are your thoughts on, does government have a place, a big part of this, of making housing more affordable or accessible for the next generation?
You own a house with a government in a communist country. That is a ridiculous statement. I mean, Rick, that is a ridiculous statement. I'm going to partially own a home with the provincial government. That's communism. That is what that is. I mean, it is. Tell me differently. Like there's no argument for me that says government is supposed to be in housing ownership. I get the way it's framed. I think it's ridiculous. We could look at a million different things to reduce costs. I'm actually very curious to know what the number is, because I think Ron could speak to this better than anybody. DCC charges are right now 30% of the cost of a new home. Mm-hmm. If there's $1 million home in Kelowna, that's $300,000 in taxes. I don't think it should be zero. I know there's a line, but is 300,000 of the $1 million?
I was going to go back on the communist cost. Because whoever lends you the money, doesn't matter if it's the Royal Bank or the provincial government. At the end of the day, one would hope the program has that scrutiny, and it's about getting people in it. But in terms of DCCs, though, the thing.
But hang on, Ron. I just want. Okay. The government did not say we're going to lend you the money. The government said we're going to partner with you and give you the money, and we are going to take a stake in the equity. And when the house goes up, we are going to also take a piece of that equity. Yeah. The Royal Bank did not say to me, that's the defining difference for me. Right?
It's kind of a model they used, I think, in Whistler, very similar model, trying to get people into housing. but actually not allowing them to take the full benefit of the increase in value, and so they can put the money back into the program. But DCCs, I spoke on DCCs my whole life. One of the problems that people don't see is DCCs aren't a tax. DCCs are, what does it cost to say, let's take the upper mission, when we developed the upper mission. You had the ALR, and to be able to take all the trunk sewers, the arterial roads, and to be able to service that, no developer could do that. One tried, went bankrupt. So the idea of the DCCs was to get together with the development community. I sat for hours in meetings saying, how wide does the road? We even argued the thickness of the asphalt, right? And if Mike Jacobs is listening, he'll remember he was sitting there too. The thickness of the asphalt, the size of the pipes, whatever is actually needed to service, let's say, 2,000 units. Took those costs, which we all agreed to in the end, and divided it by 2,000. And so what it allowed them to do was to be able to incrementally pay for the servicing. The old model was to put it on the first guy in. First guy in parried it, always went bankrupt.
Right.
So I think DCCs, and they're huge, but if you didn't have DCCs, then land wouldn't be developed, or if the municipality took on that, because once upon a time the federal government would pay for those things. This is downloading, right? They said, hey, good news, good news, we're not going to give you money to do this anymore, but you can charge developers. Isn't that great? And you be the bad guy. So I think that DCCs are very high, but as long as the program is sound, it's put in place with the development community, everybody's sitting around the table, I think it's just the cost of doing business.
Scott, I do want to go back to Ron's trigger word, which is DCCs. So what are your thoughts on, I think overall, because development cost charges for those not in the building industry, but what are your thoughts on what Jeff said, which was 30% of a cost of a home is DCCs? Well, permits and a whole bunch of other things. But anyway.
Yeah, I'm going to refer to that in a second. The article I read about the rents going up was actually on Castanet, our dear friends Castanet, and it said that the average rent went up $108 a month to $1,731, and rents for a bachelor unit were $1,370, a one bedroom $1,565, and two bedrooms $1,935. So it all went up, even though the vacancy rate went up. So that I just want to give a little plug to our little Castanet friends there. But the DC, I think. I actually agree with Ron. There has to be a way. There's no good way, and this is the better way. And to have that, even though it's up to 30%, as Jeff suggested, it does seem a bit extreme, especially when you're trying to create that affordability option for individuals. When those costs are so high, it only gets downloaded to the consumer eventually. And I think that is that's. It's, as you say, Ron, the cost of doing business. But I think, there has to be some willingness to have some creative approaches in our community that perhaps aren't as, relying on the municipality or developers, but maybe there's other groups that can come speak into what are some new ways to do it. Like I know in Victoria, they have inclusionary housing now, which is where they came together with groups and local sectors, and they really tried to help developers in the municipality understand how can we create some housing that has an inclusionary or affordability option. And they did it in a number of different ways. They had cash in lieu and a few other options that they helped provide those options within buildings. So now the developer has their regular, charges on the normal housing, whatever the units are, and then they have some inclusionary, and it has to be included in certain sectors. So they did it based on, the most populous sectors like downtown, et cetera. But if you're, that'd be like the same for us. On other parts of the communities that didn't have that, they were actually, they changed the calculations of how it would come about. It was just a really fascinating model. And I go, can we think of some new models that, like Victoria or other parts there's 4 or 5 communities in British Columbia who've done that just create some different pathways so that it's not always shouldered on the consumer, but it actually is shared a bit better.
Let me go. I have to go back on Jeff, only because you're not wrong, Jeff. I think development cost charges per se could be done right and fair, and I think even the development industry would agree to that when you do it. But where you're right is there's what we don't look at is all the charges on top of it. So to get a single family, well, you have DCCs. It could be $35,000, $40,000 if it's in the mission. But what you also have is, you might have environmental permits and heritage permits and agricultural permits. And so you're not wrong that I think that, we do have to look at those other kind of fees, which really are just permit fees. Like they're not necessarily attached to what it costs to regulate it. And I think that's where a lot of municipalities are piling on, and because they come at you one at a time, very few people have actually sat down and said, let's look at this house or look at this apartment building and what did we pay in fees. And I think there is for sure where people should be looking and saying, well, are all these things justified? Do we really need to do it, or are we doing it because we can ask for it, right? So I absolutely agree with you there. And
I just want to add to this, and maybe again weigh in on this too, Ron, but so I'm a developer. I want to build a house, and so for me, I see that the DCCs are brought in, and I have to pay that, and I understand that, but I carry that cost through to the end consumer of that house. Now, and this is a political discussion as well. So the council goes, yeah, we like DCCs because the developer has to take that cost on and what have you, but instead of and this is an idea brought to me by a developer. He says, what maybe is the imbalance and why we need to start looking at this differently through the lens of Scott here is maybe you look at taking it from general revenue, raising the tax increase year after year of running the city of Kelowna. And it's not, and that way you're able to lower the DCCs because they do have to get paid. Like there's no way around that; they have to get paid. So, but do you pull that from the general revenue and raise, because then that's the onus on the tax burden is on every one of us, and we're all trying to lower the cost of building a house versus someone trying to buy a brand new house. So the DCCs are so high, and as a result, they're not accessible for people.
When you raise taxes to offset the cost of building homes, and I'll be facetious, for rich Calgarians, the little old lady on Richter Street who bought her home 40 years ago is going to say, I'm going to elect an anti-growth council. And then you end up with various communities around the province.
And, listen, and I want to bring up, DCCs have to exist. And I think you have said it correctly. You've been through enough to know that that's the best way to do it. So I would agree with you there. I think it becomes the question of, is 30% the number? And I don't know that anybody at this table can answer that, but I'm going to go with no. It's not a matter of it really just becomes the ratio of what should those charges be versus what we're building. I'm always curious when I find a Calgary, which I get is flat land and sprawling and everything that comes with it. But there's to me, for the 20 years that I've been going there, constantly building master communities. And it just goes one, and it doesn't matter, northeast, northwest, southeast, it doesn't matter where you go. Yep. They build these master communities. They seem to do a very good job at it. Mm-hmm. Every community has a grocery store, a gym, a coffee shop, a liquor store. You can live there on the weekends. You may go somewhere else. There's typically other communities around that have larger centers. We've not seemed to be able to adopt that. I fully recognize geography probably has a lot to do with it, but I'm not going to be totally bought in that it's right today, right? And I agree with you.
And Jeff, so what it means then is and this is well within the control of council is, remember I said we got together in a room. So, what is the standard for an arterial? Do you need an arterial there? Maybe a collector's okay. And so, there are ways to go down. I mean, I guess it's a bit like buying a house and, if you want this kind of finish or can you afford that kind of finish? And so, those are the types of things people, I think, really has, rather than just ratcheting it up. I think, there is a good time to stop and say, do we need all this? Is this really making a difference? Is it creating, what's more important? The way our parks are built or the fact that people can afford a house? And those are ultimately the decisions councils can make, right? I mean, once you decide the standard, well, now here's the bill that comes with that standard. Doesn't mean you have to build that.
Right.
I want to switch gears a little bit into we have basically a 20% flipping tax introduced in January 1st with the NDP government. And I talked to in-laws that I have that flip houses every couple of years in Saskatoon. This is 20% if you don't own the house, you know, and there could be factors if you need to get out of the house quicker, as in divorce or change a job or whatever. But is this help or hindering the housing market, the housing crisis? Is this good or bad? Over to you, Scott. Is this a good policy you think that's being introduced of hitting people with a 20% tax if they sell that house within 2 years of owning it?
Yeah, I think I understand the sentiment behind it of trying to create less of that turnover in the community, so people are taking advantage. I'm more tax. I'm not going to be a fan of. I don't think ever. And I especially when it comes, it seems that the government has, I'm sure there's information behind it. I'm sure they've spent their time researching, but these arbitrary taxes that come to hopefully solve, it's much like what we talked about, the short-term rentals and the regulations that came in for that, and communities adopting that. And I think there's always good intent, but there's always a downside to it. And I think you maybe they're watching, a lot of people that spend time watching HGTV and all the flippers, and they're having, they get a little frustrated with all the people, and they're like, how come that's not happening? But I think the fact that governments continue to want to put that onus on us, and I think it's not difficult to feel like, even if you own a house and purchase a house, there's a property transfer tax, right? It's just incessant, and it continues, and I find it frustrating, and I haven't researched enough to understand, if it's a valid tax from the government standpoint to go, hey, we've seen this problem, and this is a problem because we're not allowed, the flippers in the community are taking advantage, or it's larger companies that are buying bigger swaths of houses and doing it, and I think ultimately it's going to impact the young individuals who are companies that want to build, and they want to build equity and build a company, and it's going to impact that because now it comes off the top again, and where do they recover that? And it could be to Ron's point, where now you don't build to the same level that you were going to build, or you just don't build at all or flip at all.
Over to you, Jeff. And again, I'm also thinking about this blanket approach, which again, and Scott just said it feels like it originated out of Vancouver. Like, this is where this tax felt like it came from, kind of like the Landlord and Tenant Act. Like, it feels like it came out of really Surrey, where there was some issues around landlords and how they were treating tenants, but this is a blanket thing across the province. So, do you think this is a good, bad, ugly hindrance thing? Well, I can already tell. I mean, no one has to guess, but anyway.
Well, Scott touched on it. So we now have a speculation tax that exists for people that are was supposed to be targeted at foreign buyers. So you got a spec tax. You have a property transfer tax if you are gonna purchase or sell a home, right? You now have a home flipping tax. On new homes, we have government sales tax. If you do a renovation that exceeds a percentage of the house, you're going to pay GST on the new price. It's excessive. I mean, where do you want to stop? That and it's not working. It's not, again, surely after 10 years of the federal Liberals, we don't have to talk about the fact that taxation is not working. It's they have a 16% approval rating, mostly based on excessive tax and excessive spending over the last decade. Like, it doesn't work. There's a very basic function, which then needs very professionals like Ron to step in, but it's supply and demand. Like, we have a supply and demand issue, and that's the bottom. That's it. That's the bottom line. Again, where we've gone from 30 million people to 42 million people in this country literally overnight. Like I would suggest yesterday, I was like, how many people live in Canada? 30? What is it today? 42 million? Like it's not, there are so many other factors that are playing into this challenge. And then again, to the points you guys have made, you are living in what most of us would argue is probably the most sought after place to live in Canada, especially for retirement. And then how do you support young families that are either generational that have been here or are here for work? There's so many factors in this. I can assure you a home flipping tax is not going to be the solution. Not to mention, I don't know a long list of home flippers that are millionaires. Like home flippers, by definition, are usually blue collar, hardworking people that have a skill and are trying to get ahead. And so they step into a home, they improve it, because I can't buy that. I can't do what they do, and I'm probably for most of us I don't find the home that they've bought attractive. They typically have a vision. They go and they make the changes and they sell to people that can't do it, and they get to walk in and go, wow, you know what? For a marginal increase in the cost, this is something that I'm sought after. So to me, it's beyond that. Like it's actually counterproductive, which we're trying to do, which is create viable homes in a city that now has homes in this area that are 100 years old, that home flippers can come in and say, you know what? I, in a very short period of time, can make this look good, and I'll live here for 1 year, and then I'll put some money in my pocket, I'll go on and do it again. Tell me differently. That's my take on it, right? I don't understand. There's not a long list of millionaire home flippers that I'm aware of. Like these are typically people that have jobs and are doing this as a second income. And they're helping improve our community. The homes look better. Like I can't figure out where
So
that
I'm sensing you're not for it. I'm just trying to figure this out. But Ron, what's your sense?
Well, my sense is, I learned a long time ago that when you really try to do things that you think are really good, there's always unintended consequences that you never foresaw that pop up. And I think, one of the things, we live in an era right across the board, federal government, provincial government, maybe municipal governments, where old guys like me are no longer part of the scene. And so you end up with advisory committees or whatever. And I think they're not necessarily looking at the implications. I'd like to think at some point in time there was somebody that would say, well, here's your average flipper. Like, you have the data on your average flipper. Like, what is the unintended? To me here, it's very simple. I think what they're trying to deal with is the fact that housing is now a commodity. Housing is no longer shelter. For our lives, when you grew up in the Hull Road area, when I grew up, your parents saved their money or built their own, or they bought a house and you lived there your whole life, and they lived there until they could no longer live there. And then they sold it. The world has changed. People buy houses now because they just want to upgrade, like you did, like your car. And so I think each government has a philosophy that they come at it, and I think one of the things they're looking at is, how do we deal with a house as a commodity as opposed to shelter? And I think so. Some of these things are aimed at that, but the unintended consequences, Bill and Mary are kind of did okay flipping houses, and probably didn't hurt anyone in them, as opposed to people investing in condos in Vancouver and even in Kelowna, strictly as investments, not as shelter, and then just buying them for X, flipping them for Y, and driving up the cost. And I think, how you tackle that problem, every government's going to have a philosophy, right?
So unintended consequences?
Unintended consequences.
Okay, that's our word for today.
I could write a book about unintended consequences.
So I want to bring up our sponsor, which is Jennifer Maddison, Realtor for RE/MAX. And if you want to sell a house, or even maybe want to buy one, there's two kinds of people in the world, Scott. And there's one or the other.
Buyers and sellers.
She is fabulous and an excellent wife. So anyway, I have one last question. This is the lightning round. We have so much to talk about. And one is the the Landlord and Tenant Act, I just touched on it briefly, but is it outdated? Does it need to be tweaked? Like, because over the years, I've heard people say, I would open up my home, or I'd open up a room, or I'd provide more space if that was just less unbalanced. Scott, let's start with you. And
I think we actually a number of years ago we rented, and we had an owner that we were renting from, obviously, and we looked at that act, and I was pretty amazed by it, actually, in the sense of
We can stop paying rent.
That's right. It was basically it was so pro tenant that it was I think it was unfair for an owner in so many different capacities. And I actually, you're joking about that, Ron, but it was truly like the amount of effort it would take to have somebody, or to get somebody to move out of your place, was so significant. And it almost felt like it penalized the owner, that as soon as you have a tenant, if you don't do your due diligence ahead of time and get the right person in there, you're in a heap of trouble. And
a world of hurt.
Yeah, and so I absolutely would agree. You're saying it's lightning, so that's my quick answer.
Jeff,
There's data around it. There's, I wish I knew it cold. There is somewhere around 100,000 homeowners in the province of British Columbia that are either in a position today or within $5,000 of renovations from being able to rent a portion of their home. And the majority of those people, north of 75% of them, don't do it strictly based on that act. I am one of them. I have a suite above my garage that could generate some revenue, and I just am not willing to take the risk.
wow. Okay.
Yeah, I've heard nothing, all anecdotal, no data. People, friends of mine who have been in a situation where they've bought a place here, they live out of town, but their idea was to, move downtown. Somebody rented it. Like, it took them well over a year. The guy stopped paying rent, went multiple appeals, and it took them a long time. And that's just one case. I think the whole argument about why people rent their homes out in short-term rentals is because everyone I talk to, and I say, I don't have a lot of sympathy for you, say, well, I would rent it, but I'm not taking that risk.
Right.
So I think at this point, it actually is detrimental. And I think there's a serious look at how do we balance so that there's a balance of rights for both parties. Because right now, again, I think it is actually keeping rental stock out of the market.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad we solved the housing crisis today.
It felt like that.
It felt good. This is One Foot Off Center. If you're listening to this, thank you so much for listening, and tell your friends about it, because we'll keep doing more of these. I'd like to thank Scott Lanigan, Jeff Cox, Ron Mattiussi. It's been a lot of fun. We'll see you next time.
Thanks.
Thanks.
1 foot off center.